Okay, so I'll get started. So welcome. I put together this talk because I thought it was something that would interest a lot of us. It's consistent with what I'm interested in, but I think can benefit the overall parrot community. So this talk is what the budgie can teach us about parrot keeping. And I'm really excited to give this talk because I have a very special place in my heart for budgies. I have a particular focus and interest in this species, but this species brings us a lot of information that also are common themes for other parrot species as well. This talk is going to focus particularly in what budgies have in common with other species. If you want to know what is unique to budgies and their species-specific differences, feel free to reach out to me after or ask in a Q&A, and I'll address those questions. So this is my first time speaking here. Again, I want to thank Pamela for introducing me. I want to thank Anne and Phoenix Landing for having me. It's really exciting. So I'll give a quick introduction just so you kind of know a little bit about me. So this is me back when I first graduated my PhD a couple of years ago. So my educational background is in animal science, mostly specializing in animal physiology. I originally went to the beautiful university in Ithaca, New York, Cornell. I did my bachelor's there and I really loved it. So I decided to stay and do my PhD there. So my specialty is in animal physiology, mostly focusing on reproduction, hormone production, and I also have additional training in avian nutrition and parrot behavior. So if you're ever looking for me anywhere else, you can find me at the Budgie Academy. You'll probably recognize my nerdy, scholarly budgie logo. So if you ever see that, that's me. And of course, I have my wonderful flock. So my flock right now is 3 female budgies. So that is Fitzy, Tritzy, and Eva. I have my 2 cockatiels, Gandalf and Sydney, and as well as my past members that are here as well. And I thought to include them because we will talk about their cases as well during the talk. So there's a little bit of a background of who's in the room. I don't know if you can hear it on the Zoom, but you'll probably hear them in the background. So I thought I'd start with a personal story. So one of the features and traits of coming from a scientific background is sometimes when I give talks, it sounds like a scientific seminar. It sounds like a conference talk. But this time, I really wanted to bring a little bit more of a personal touch. I thought it was a really interesting way for us to connect the science with what we face every day as parrot owners when we have these animals living in our house. So what brought me to this topic today? Today's topic is mostly about what budgies have in common in general, but mostly focusing on managing hormones, managing reproduction, parrot care. So what is it, right? Where do we start? So as you saw on my other slide, this is my budgie Fitzy. So Fitzy is one of my first female budgies, and she was a very prolific egg layer starting around 3 years old. And I was very happy up until she was about 3 years old because I was like, yes, I'm doing great. So far no eggs, like we're managing it well. But her pattern was very interesting. She laid only between June and August. And it was very strange that every year she seemed to come into breeding season earlier and earlier and earlier, to the point where in the more recent years, it was, like the middle of April, I started seeing a lot of cavity seeking, her trying to identify a nest site, her increasing her chewing. It was so clear that her hormone levels were up. And I tried various methods over the years to manage her laying, and I came from reproductive physiology, and reproductive hormones are a very small field, actually. So I thought, I'm going to figure this out, because for her safety, she would lay massive clutches. She laid like 8 eggs per clutch. And eventually I used dummy eggs to reduce her clutch size, but still it was a lot of eggs for her to be laying every summer. And so I tried various methods over the years to manage her laying, and she was the first reason why I thought we really needed to reevaluate breeding triggers for budgies, because I had scoured the world's knowledge, and most of them were not effective. And I've been working with animals a long time, and it's usually when something is not effective, it means something is not right with that literature. It's time to reevaluate the literature and bring new research to the table because something is not adding up in the biology. So as I went on that journey, one of the first things I had to look at is what is a budgie, right? If I want to look at what the budgie requires in order to manage her breeding, first we start with the species. So the Budgerigar, aka the budgie, is one of our most beloved small grass parakeets. They are native to Australia, so they're not from here. They have the Latin name Melocidicus undulatus, named for their very melodic vocal. And they come in these very large flocks. These birds are known to form very sizable flocks, and when conditions are right, many flocks can join together to form absolutely massive swarms of budgies, right? And these birds are opportunistic breeders. And the reason that I mentioned that is you're going to find that that particular feature about them is very, very key in understanding how they regulate their breeding and what it is exactly that it takes to manage their breeding properly. So what does it mean to be an opportunistic breeder? That means that they don't have a defined breeding season. They don't breed at a particular time of the year. If you look at the literature that tracks when budgies breed across Australia, you'll see that they breed in different times in different parts of the country. And it's because they're always traveling in search of food and water. They're traveling looking for the favorable, correct conditions. So it's not a particular time of year that they breed, it's under a particular set of conditions that they breed. And this is what we call an opportunistic breeder. But the budgie, because of their small size, they were initially exported from Australia to Europe in the mid-1800s, and they're easy to breed. They can breed very quickly, they mature very quickly. And as a result, today, they're one of the most commonly found parrots in captivity. So a lot of people would ask, we have so many parrots out there, as I'm sure all of you have in your homes. We have so many different species of parrots out there. Why is the budgie interesting, right? People ask me all the time, what makes the budgie interesting? And what makes the budgie useful as a model or as a starting point for us to evaluate the biology of many of our other parrot species from many different parts of the world? So the budgie as a model is very interesting because of their small size. They're fast to mature because they have evolved for this rapidly unpredictable and changing environment in that area of Australia. So they breed fast, they lay fast, they grow fast, and they fledge fast. So budgies will go from hatching to nearly their fully adult size in just around 4 weeks. So they grow very, very fast. And when they fledge, they become independent very, very quickly. So they're easy to breed. And as a result of their fast maturing and their ease of breeding, they become easy to study. So in a scientific setting, it means that we can get enough number of these birds in a room or in a facility and then watch their behavior or track their diet. It's a lot easier than, say, a bird like a macaw, which is very large and takes many years to come to maturity and breed. It's very hard to fit 80 macaws in a facility, but you can have 80 budgies, right? So it made the budgie very open to study, and it allowed us to bring a lot of research and literature forward and evidence forward with the budgie as a model, and use that as a springboard to see, is this still in common with the other parrot species? Because among the parrot species, there will be things that they do have in common and things that they do not have in common. So today's topics, that kind of leads me to talk about today's topics, which is we're going to talk about some of the common themes that we see amongst the various parrot species. And 3 of the things that I'm going to touch on today, we're going to talk about calories, we're going to talk about day length, and we're going to talk about temperature. These are not the only things, but these are the 3 things that we'll focus on today that I think are very much within our control to regulate our parrots' breeding and hormone levels. So excessive breeding behaviors is always very interesting. You hear this word hormones all the time, and as parrot owners, we are always facing this, right? Excessive breeding behaviors is one of the most common challenges that we face with having these animals in captivity, and especially when we have these animals in our homes. But there is a pattern that emerges from here. And through my years of struggle in evaluating the scientific literature, I did see a very clear pattern, and that slowly led me to where I am today, which is what we'll talk about. So I wanted to share a little bit more of the backstory. So one of the members of my flock was a bird named Callie. I adopted her, and you can see in this photo, she looked quite messy when I first adopted her. She was very, very underweight, very thin. Plumage looked not good at all. She was about 5 years old when I adopted her from another owner. Her other cage mate had passed away from, at the time, what they thought was liver cancer. And she didn't want another budgie, but she didn't want her to be alone. She knew I had 2 budgies already, and she asked me, would you please take her? I said, okay, sure. So I took Callie in, and she was very cute, underweight, malnourished, and had a few health challenges, but nevertheless, we nursed her back to health, and soon she looked much better, much fluffier, much shinier, very exciting. She, put on the weight, and she was back up to the body weight that she was supposed to be. What was very interesting, and a little bit of context, I know those of you who have budgies probably already know this, but female budgies are one of the easiest ways to tell whether a female budgie is in breeding mode or not in breeding mode is through the color of their cere. So that is this part where their nostrils are. So most female budgies, assuming they don't have a color variation that's changing their color, most female budgies, when they come into breeding season, they will have a dark brown, kind of thick, crusty cere. And then if they're not in breeding season, they will have this kind of like light blue, Cinderella blue kind of cere. It can sometimes look like a light brown as well. It depends on the color variation of your budgie. That's in contrast to the male budgie, where they will have that dark blue cere year round. So she looks great. She was fluffy, she was cute, energetic, wonderful. But after a little while, once her health came in and looked good, and then she continued on those particular care practices, things changed. And you could very quickly see within a few months, she progressed to this brown looking cere color, right? And I started to see some different behaviors. She was not the most sensitive of my flock, but I still could see some hormonal behaviors. I could see a little bit extra increased chewing on wood toys, a little bit of cavity seeking, but overall not too bad. But it was very clear she was sporting that little brown cere of hers. Another case, I promise that this is what the budgie can teach us about other species, and I do have some other species in my house. So Gandalf is one of my birds who, from a behavioral perspective, is also one of my great pride and joys, because he came in with very severe woman-specific aggression, which included flying attacks at my head upon even a 1 second of eye contact, which was very interesting. From quite a distance too, from like 4 or 5 feet away, he would fly and attack my head. And so I am his 3rd owner. So he had built up a little bit of this behavior from his 2nd owner, and that was a big behavior assault. But he was, very quickly evolved into a proper distinguished gentleman from a behavior standpoint. He was delightful. But he started to show some very interesting behaviors as well. When he first came into my house, I knew he had some hormonal challenges with the previous home that the owner didn't really know how to work with. But when he came into my home, the change in environment typically will bring their hormones down a little bit, but very quickly I began to see it come up again. Despite putting him on a better diet, he came in on an LC diet. Despite putting him on a better diet, I could still see some very interesting behaviors, such as cavity seeking. And those of you who have parrots know that they can be very creative in the way that they cavity seek. So this is one example that I thought was particularly interesting, because I've designed my house that cavities are not abundantly found in my house. It's not easy to find a place to nest in this house. So he got really creative with his cavity seeking. And this was one of, I thought, the most interesting examples. And he began to show some other very fascinating behaviors. So I once found him incubating what my AirPods case. I can't blame him. It does kind of look like an egg. So I found him on my bed incubating or attempting to incubate this AirPods case. He was trying very hard, but it is in fact, at the end of the day, not an egg, and he could not quite fit it underneath himself. This is one of the species-specific differences between budgies and cockatiels. Cockatiels, the males do more incubating, compared to in the budgies, the females do most of the incubating. So he was showing me this very interesting behavior. And one of the things I actually saw was he would also incubate other various things, like the floor of his cage, you know, and like different parts of the bottoms of the curtains. And it was very clear he had a really high level of hormones running all the time. So I thought, okay, like something's going on. Then I got Sydney. Sydney is very delightful 11-year-old female cockatiel. She had laid eggs for her previous owners as well. She also came in on a higher calorie seed diet. But despite me putting her on a better diet, I saw the same thing. She was doing this presenting business, trying to get someone to mate with her. And of course, I was going nowhere near that because we don't want to build that kind of relationship with our parrots. But it was very interesting to me that she started to present this behavior. And it started to make me wonder, what is going on? You know, why are all of these birds in my house consistently exhibiting these higher hormonal behaviors? You know, one animal is one thing. We can maybe justify and say that that animal is a little more sensitive or something genetic. But this was case after case after case after case of birds who are on a high quality diet that meets their nutrient requirements, that has a good protein profile, is not excessively high in calories or fat. So what is going on? Something's happening, right? So that led me to the calorie density. And we'll talk a little bit about this calorie density and an indication of calorie-rich food sources and how that ultimately that was the key to regulating a lot of this behavior. So calorie-dense foods are one of the most important things that trigger breeding. And animals amongst the animal kingdom vary in how they regulate their breeding. How do they know? When should they start breeding and when should they not start breeding? And not just from a behavioral perspective, when do they know that they should activate these physical pathways in order for that to happen? Because parrots in the wild do not maintain a breeding state in their body year round. Their internal reproductive organs will build up to prepare for the breeding season, and then they will actually shrink down intentionally in order to go to the non-breeding season, because it takes calories and energy and resources and protein in order to keep those organs in an active state. So when birds are in breeding, sometimes what you'll see is if you have a bird who weighs 32 to 33 grams, let's say for a budgie, if you put them on a breeding diet and trigger their breeding, you'll see them go up to about 36 or 37 grams. It's not just the food, it's actually because they're activating their reproductive organs. And so they're building up the reproductive organs, and in their active state, they have more tissue. And as a result, the bird weighs more. And it's one of the ways that we can actually track their breeding status besides the color of their serum. So one of the ways that's very common in the animal kingdom of how animals know when is a good time to breed and when is not is when they have access to higher calorie foods versus lower calorie foods. And this is a particularly interesting thing because budgies, like we talked about before, are opportunistic breeders. They do not have a defined breeding season. And so they travel in search of a high calorie food supply, and they settle in areas when there is a high calorie food supply. And the abundance and the availability of these higher calorie foods is what triggers the courtship, triggers the mating behaviors, and it starts the process. The courting of the male to the female, which is an additional trigger for the female. It triggers the mating process. If the female also is receiving a high calorie diet, she will accept mating from a male that she deems fit. They will cavity seek, find a nest, and then once they've identified the nest, she will enter the nest, clean it out, lay her eggs. She'll incubate, hatch the eggs, raise the clutch, fledge the babies, and then if conditions continue to be good, rinse and repeat. budgies have a very explosive breeding style. So as long as conditions are good, they will enter right back into another clutch. And for the budgies who just fledged, the chicks who just fledged, at just a few months of age, they can immediately start reproducing. So we will often see if good conditions last long enough, they can form this huge explosive production number of budgies, because even the next generation of budgies has begun to produce their own chicks, and then they fledge. And so it can grow exponentially quite rapidly. But budgies are not alone in this, right? Cockatiels are from a similar part of the world. And interestingly, despite them coming from a different family of parrot, they have evolved towards the same direction. So they've actually evolved a very similar pathway to live in a very similar environment. So cockatiels are also an opportunistic style breeder, and they have evolved a very similar pathway. So some research from the Clasing lab at UC Davis was really instrumental in highlighting this for me. And I'll talk a little bit about how it occurred to me that calorie density was important. And it was actually because of a combination from Pamela Clark's work. And she had observed for many, many years that certain diets seem to do better and reduce hormones in parrots. And we'll talk more about that. But at the time, we didn't know exactly what in the nutrition was there. We knew it had something to do with the calories, but where exactly was it? And it was really Dr. Clasing's research from UC Davis showing that breeding can be triggered simply by raising the calorie density of the diet alone, and changing nothing else was enough to send his entire flock into breeding. And so this research is particularly interesting because it's not the amount of food, it's the calorie density of the food. And there's a really big difference between those two things. And that's why if you're feeding a higher calorie diet and you just feed less, it's not going to fix the problem. A lot of times people say, oh, my birds are on a C diet, which is a high calorie diet. What if I just feed them less? It doesn't actually work. They will be hormonal and hungry at the same time. So it's the calorie density of the food. And if you have questions about how we can specifically look at that, we can talk about that in the Q&A. So I really wanted to highlight this work from Pamela because Pamela was very instrumental in me realizing this and having this this occur to me. At the time when I was having the hormone challenges with Gandalf, I asked her, I said, you know, what would you suggest? And she suggested various dietary adjustments. And through her 30 years of work, she knew that this worked for these birds. And I was like, I know it has something to do with the nutritional composition, but what was it? And it was at that time I had the great fortune of talking with Kirk Clasing in UC Davis. And that was when he revealed to me his research, and it became immediately obvious. That's what it was. That is the phenomenon that we had been observing all of this time. The higher calorie density food triggers their breeding. And if we want to reduce their breeding, we simply need to lower the calorie density. And Pamela has observed this and been very successful in reducing hormonal behaviors by adjusting the diet. And it's been effective in a wide variety of species. And this makes a lot of sense because it's very consistent with the biology of these birds around the world. When you observe these birds in the wild, they breed with the availability of high calorie foods. If you track their cycles throughout the year, it makes a lot of sense. And it's very consistent with the biology of various different animals around the world. So this makes, from a biological standpoint, a lot of sense. So let's get a little more practical. For us in our house, like, what does that mean, right? How do we translate this to what we physically do every day with our birds? So first is seed mix generally is a high calorie food. This is probably not shocking to you. This is like one of the first things that people learn when it comes to feeding parrots a healthy diet. Seed mix is a higher calorie food. And so we need to be very intentional and very careful in how much seed we feed, what types of seed we feed. Not all seed is created equal in their calorie content. Some seed is actually perfectly fine in calorie content if it's fed in an intentional and controlled amount. And some seeds are much higher in calorie content, so we have to be very careful with how much we feed. So with these seed mixes being still unfortunately very prevalent amongst a lot of birds, we see a lot of these associated hormonal behaviors. So feeding seed mix or an excessive amount of seed mix in the diet, we see high levels of breeding and reproduction associated behaviors. So we see egg laying, we see masturbation on toys from male birds, regurgitating on toys, cavity seeking, and even aggression from some of these birds. So we know that reducing that calorie density is really key to reducing those hormonal behaviors. Now, what about pellets? One of the most important things that I tell owners that come to work with me when it comes to adjusting the diet is not all pellets are created equal. I know it's very challenging because a lot of pellets will market themselves as we're the best pellet, and in another pellet it says no, we're the best pellet. And I know it's really confusing if you're not coming from a background with a lot of nutrition background where you can look at the actual analysis of the ingredients. It's hard. I know it's hard. But one of the take-home messages is that pellets vary by formulation. They are not all made equal, and not all parrots eat the same pellet. It varies based on the species, and it varies based on their life status. So for example, a bird that's breeding has substantially different nutrient requirements than the same bird when they're not breeding. And it's really important to align what you feed your bird with their nutritional requirement that fits for them and that species, because the different species also have different nutrient requirements. So what I would feed a budgie is not the same diet that someone would feed an African gray. It is not the same diet that we might feed a macaw, for example. So this marketing sometimes when it's like, our pellet is the best for everybody. Not quite, right? So we have to be really careful about that. Now, one of the things that that you'll see and people will ask me is it the pellet making your parrots hormonal? A lot of owners over the years feel like they're observing this thing in their birds where they're like, it seems like when my bird eats more pellet, they're more hormonal. And it seems like when they eat a little more fresh food, they're less hormonal. And it's spawned some various interesting theories. People wonder, is it the soy? Is it the phytoestrogens in the soy? Is it the chemicals? Is it something in the pellet? The reality is that most pellets, once you analyze their calorie density, is that most pellets are too high in calorie density. And that is why we are seeing what we are seeing. Because of the way that they were formulated, it was formulated before we had this research on calorie density. So before, we didn't know. We just knew that we needed to meet their nutrient requirements. They needed a minimum amount of calories. They had a minimum amount of protein that we have to meet, minimums of every amino acid, vitamins, and minerals that we have to meet. So no one really thought about what if it's too much until it starts to border at the point where the bird is obese. But no one really thought about that really nuanced calorie density in the middle, right? That middle of the road calorie density, where is the right place for pellets? And one of the reasons that the pellets were formulated a little bit on the higher end is because most parrots wouldn't eat it, because a lot of parrots come from a seed diet. And if you give them a lower calorie pellet, or you formulate your pellet a little bit lower calorie, these birds would not eat it and owners would not buy it. Because owners like to see that we put a food there and they immediately eat it and they look so happy and they love their food. And I get it, we love our birds. We want to see our birds happy. And so we don't want to try to push them to eat something that they don't want to eat, right? But the result is a lot of the pellets on the market are formulated a bit too high in calorie density, especially for the opportunistic breeders. So this is where it's really important to have someone look at your bird one-on-one and see your bird's situation. Because for opportunistic breeders, they have a lower calorie threshold than the other species. So some species the pellet is going to be a perfect fit, but if I fed that pellet to my budgie, it would be too high. So it's really important to know what species we're feeding, what animal we're feeding, and find the pellet that fits for them. But when you're matched the correct pellet, there's no more excessive hormonal behaviors. So all of this kind of conspiracy about, is it the phytoestrogens? Is it the chemicals? It's not those things. It's the calorie density. And one of the interesting things about calorie density is that they don't print it on the bag. So people don't usually consider calorie density anywhere in the thought process when wondering and searching for what's causing these behaviors. But when you match the bird with the correct pellet, you will no longer see excessive hormonal behaviors. So what about fresh food mixes, right? I would encourage most owners to feed at least some amount of fresh food for the behavior and for the enrichment, and even just overall for the fiber and omega-3s. It's important to feed some fresh food. But you want to be careful about what you add into your fresh mix. I know chop is kind of a new concept that everybody's hearing about now, and making these various diverse fresh food mixes, but it's really important to know what is the correct way to make one that fits the nutrient profile for your particular species versus just dumping a bunch of high calorie items in there and calling it a chop, right? So if we overdo the number of high calorie items in the chop, you will see more hormonal behaviors. So it's really important when you make these mixes to avoid overusing refined products with a high calorie density. I usually tell people, be careful with the pasta, because I know a lot of mixes have all this pasta in there, and I love pasta too. I love carbohydrates. We all do, and so do our birds. But pasta is a ground flour pressed into a shape, and so it's very absorbable and is high in carbohydrates and high in calories. So it can really send their hormones through the roof if you overdo it. So be very careful with how much of these kind of like refined products you add to these fresh food mixes. Fiber will certainly help. So when we make fresh food mixes, one of the things that I look for is making sure there's enough fiber, especially if the other portion of their diet is a pellet, which will not have as much fiber. Most of these parrots in the wild, if you look at their diet has much more fiber than it does here in captivity with the formulated food. So the fresh mix is an opportunity to add more fiber to the diet. It will improve the digestion of the food, and it will regulate their calorie absorption. So when you make a chop, we aim for whole grains with strong protein profile and strong micronutrient profile. And we can talk about what that means. So what about other factors? Is it all calorie density? Is there something else going on? What else regulates this pathway? So we'll go back to Fitzy's story for a second, because I didn't tell you how it ended. So one of the things that I hear all the time, and the most common suggestion that I received when I started asking other people for their suggestions on how to tackle this particular biological pathway, one of the things I would hear all the time is to reduce day length. I'm sure most of you are not stranger to this, hearing that parrots should be in the dark for 12 hours, they should receive 12 hours of sleep per night. This is a very interesting thing, because at the time, knowing the biology of the budgie as an opportunistic breeder, they breed at all different times of the year in the continent, regardless of day length. Australia as a continent is not on the equator, so they experience the fluctuations of day length throughout the year, just like I do here. I'm in Boston. So part of the year, the day length is long, and part of the year, the day length is short, but in different parts of the continent, they're breeding at different times. So this was a very interesting suggestion for this particular species, because it doesn't really biologically add up with their evolution. But I tried it because so many veterinarians told me. I tried it. And did it work? No, not even a little bit. Not even slightly. Some people ask, are you sure you're controlling the light right? Yes, I was military level strict with the light cycle, made not an ounce of difference. And from a biological standpoint, it makes sense. These birds are not tied to the day length where they've evolved to breed. So the current scientific consensus is that they have very limited, if any, response to day length at all. And this makes me wonder, right? Is this just a budgie thing? Or do we have to reevaluate this statement for our other parrots as well? Because the number of parrots that live right on the equator is not the majority. So the various other parrots that are in Australia, for example, is that something we need to consider? So let's talk a little bit about day length. So budgies do not respond to day length. The current scientific consensus, if you talk to people who are most in-depth in the research is that they are not responsive at all to day length. They have almost no responsive day length changes at all. And not all parrots experience a 12-12 light cycle. So that makes a lot of sense. Budgies do not breed with the changes of the sun. They breed during favorable conditions. They can go many years without breeding if there's a severe drought. So if they were relying on the changes in day length, that would be evolutionarily very dangerous for the survival of the species. Then people wonder, well, what if we just do it just for safety? Can there be too much darkness? And the answer is yes, there can be such a thing as too much darkness. Is it a problem if we overexpose our birds to darkness? I pulled this very interesting study. And for those of you, I know probably some of you on here are members of my Scholars Club, where I pull a lot of these papers and we look at the actual data inside these publications. But I pulled this very interesting paper because it's a really interesting study, the way that it was designed. I know it's a lot of numbers, but I'll walk you through it. Basically, they take a group of budgies and place them, when they say total darkness, it's a low light, simulating kind of a nest box, dim lighting situation. And they track how many days until they lay eggs and the number of eggs that they lay. So you see something like a range between 1 to 20 eggs, which is a lot of eggs. But if you take another group of birds and put them in 14 hours light a day, there are no eggs. If you take those birds and swap them, so the ones that were in the 14 hours daylight now go to the darkness, and then the ones that were in the darkness now go to the light. And you immediately see a very different change. The ones that were in the darkness, that were laying 1, 13, 14, 18, or another egg, once they were put in the 14 hours day length, only one of them laid another 7 eggs, which is one entire clutch, one day after the reversal, which means when they were changed, they continued to lay, which is most likely running over from their previous conditions. But the birds who were in the 14 hours day length, placed in a nest box dark environment, began to lay eggs. And this is not unique to budgies, right? We see that overexposing our birds to darkness, there is a problem with that. But this is a particularly interesting study because of the way that it was designed. So what about cockatiels, right? Let's talk about another bird. Also, I should mention, if you ever want to look up the paper, it's this little clip that I put in the bottom corner. So if you want to look up the paper, you can go look up the paper. If you can't access the full PDF, feel free to reach out to me somehow. I'm more than happy to share the PDF with you. So what about cockatiels? Cockatiels also have a very limited response to day length. It makes sense. These birds also breed at various times of the year, depending on conditions. And so if they were reliant on day length as a dominant factor, it would pose a biological problem for them. This study is very interesting because they actually separated the different factors rather than putting all the factors at once and saying that all the factors together were effective. So when they had the cockatiels, the only thing they did was increase the day length and then measure the hormone levels. They saw no change in the level of luteinizing hormone, which is one of the dominant hormones which triggers the reproductive cycle. So they saw no change in the luteinizing hormone levels at all. But if you increase the nest site, provide them a nest site, you get a really sharp peak in hormone levels. That's not surprising to us. We know the availability to cavity seek and find and identify a nest site is going to be a huge trigger to increase their hormone levels. That probably is not shocking to anybody. And the presence of a mate, physical and vocal stimulation by the mate, rapidly increases the hormone levels. That's probably also not shocking to people. And we also know the high calorie density from the previous slides is also key for the hormone levels. So for your cockatiels, this is the most important thing. And the reason that I wanted to highlight like an order here, there is actually an order in which these things happen, because a lot of times people will remove the nest site and the bird will continue to cavity seek around the house, right? Like Gandalf looking in the air conditioning vent. There's no nest box like space, but they continue to cavity seek. And why is that? He's identified a quote cavity in the middle of the floor, like in an open space in the middle of the floor. And that is triggered by the calorie density. So that is the path that these birds take. The favorable conditions, basically the calorie density, increases. That triggers their breeding hormone levels to rise. That tells them, hey, start cavity seeking. And as long as the high calorie density is there, we may not give them a nest site. We don't allow them to settle into a nest site, but they will continue to search and search and search and continue to cavity seek as long as the calorie density is telling them it's breeding season, find a nest site. And this makes a lot of sense because if in the wild, they just couldn't find a net, they searched for 10 minutes, couldn't find a nest site and just shrugged and just went, okay, and gave up, the species survival would not be very good. When conditions are right, they should look in this tree. Oh, if this tree is occupied, they should look in another tree. And if that tree is occupied, they should look in another tree. They should keep looking until they find a nest. And it makes a lot of sense. So if you're finding that you're not giving your bird a nest site, because we hear this advice all the time, and it's good advice, don't give your bird a nest box. But it still seems like they're cavity seeking all over the place. And that is because that is the order of operations. As long as the high calorie density is driving them to calorie seek, in these opportunistic style breeders like budgies and cockatiels, you're going to continue to see that cavity seeking behavior. And that's how we produce that very interesting behavior that Gandalf was doing, where he was incubating my AirPods, because it's not very nesty, it's not very dark, but he was continuing to be driven because at the time he was on the wrong diet. So what about other species, right? The world is not filled with opportunistic breeders like budgies and cockatiels. What about other species who are not opportunistic breeders? Where do they fall? Old world parrots are very interesting because if you look at their breeding pattern, many old world parrots do not breed as the day gets longer. They breed as the day gets shorter. So that's a very, very interesting pattern. And we don't have the opportunity yet to test how strong that day length pattern actually is. We don't have those studies or that research done. It may be something really interesting to study in the future, but we do know that they do not necessarily breed at the longer day lengths. New World parrots, so parrots from the Americas, like Central and South America, they do not all breed at the same time. That is another key thing. You will see a pattern. I pulled some of these publications as well that you can look at. One of these by Donald Brightsmith, where they track seasonal patterns in a particular area of Peru, of a variety of different species of parrots. And you'll see that in that paper, the smaller parrots, such as the conures, they breed a little bit earlier versus the larger species a little bit later. And the reason is because the size of the bird changes the food that they eat, right? The small birds don't eat the same food as the larger birds. So when the density of food becomes available, that is when they pair their breeding. And so you're going to see actually the spread, a difference among species of when they breed. So if all these parrots were triggered with day length as a dominant factor, as the key factor, this would kind of not line up, right, with our wild observations of these animals. The other thing that we see is that behavior issues related to excessive hormones can become more severe with excessive exposure to darkness, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And observing these parrots in the wild, I had the very good fortune of going to Costa Rica recently. And where I stayed, there are red lord Amazons that roost in the trees above the hotel, hundreds of them in these trees. And it was very interesting because they woke me up at like 4 in the morning and it was pitch black outside. Like it was dark. The sun was not up, but they were awake. So it's not rare to see this. If you go to see these parrots in the wilds, you will often hear the vocalization, and their activity spans much more than 12 hours a day. So these birds are not sleeping a continuous 12 hours. On particular in my trip, which is not a formal scientific observation per se, but 4 in the morning, I start to hear the vocals, and it runs all the way until they return back to the roosting tree around 6:30. They are quiet. But if you were to observe them, you could see they're still moving around in the trees, even though they no longer vocalize. The other thing, I pulled this particular paper, which is very interesting, is that we've seen that because sometimes we see behavior issues that are related to excessive hormones seem to become more severe with excessive exposure to darkness. we've also seen, this publication did a really interesting study in this one area, that excessive sleep was a risk factor for feather destructive behavior in African greys. So African greys that were receiving more 12 hours or more darkness a day had substantially increased levels of feather plucking behavior across the various birds that they tracked over time. And that's very interesting. I thought I'd share this with you. It's a little bit hard to tell, but this is one of my clients, Indian ringnecks, named Blue. And she is very cute, but she originally came to me specifically for screaming and the feather destructive behavior. I very quickly realized that this was associated with increased hormone production. We adjusted the diet, we adjusted the care, the handling, the routine, various things, re-engineered her living system, and she is doing much better now. It's a little bit hard to tell in this photo where like the blue is actually starting to come in. I actually just spoke to them, I think last night or the day before, and actually almost all of her chest feathers are in now. So I'm really excited to see, hopefully in another 6 months, that all of her stomach feathers will come back. That would be pretty exciting. So that kind of brings me to, people ask me, wait, if we hear this all the time, like parrots need 12 hours of sleep, like what happened, right? Like where did this come from? Like how did we get here, I had a particularly interesting experience as a PhD student because my PI was a very sharp and intelligent and astute, with strong attention to detail. And one of the things we did was when we started publishing our research, it's very common that new research will overturn old research because new technology comes to light, new information comes to light, and we continuously reevaluate, right? We reevaluate our previous understandings on a continuous basis. And so one of the things I did during my undergrad, my PhD, was as we began to research, we came across a situation where a 25, 30-year-old model that a lot of people have been operating on was not right, was very likely not right. Our research data was not lining up with the current understanding, and we looked at the data, and it was clear that the old data was very shaky, and it's because they just didn't have that technology that we have now. So we reevaluated it, and we ended up overturning it. So the model that we use now is not the model that, if you look at a textbook from 15 years ago, that statement in that textbook would no longer be true as a result of my wonderful contribution to science. So this happens all the time. We reevaluate on a continuous basis, and this is, I think, time for a reevaluation. But when we do these reevaluations, we wonder, where is it from? Like, how did this happen? And that tells you a lot about how we approach this reevaluation. So you'll see some articles. A lot of older articles look at wild observation of parrots, and parrots in these tropical areas experiencing this 12-12 light cycle. The problem is that not all parrots live on the equator. Budgies are a fantastic example of this, right? They do not live on the equator. They do not experience a 12-12 light cycle. So that doesn't apply to all parrots, even if we were to act on that assumption. And the other reason that I think this confusion came to be and had such a stronghold, even amongst many people who have a scientific background, is because there are animals who use day length as a key regulator for breeding. This is not like something that came out of nowhere. It's not something that's completely against biology. There are many animals who are seasonal breeders who use day length as their top line regulator to induce breeding. And these animals typically are animals that come from a particular area of the world where only during a particular time of the year, the same time every year, conditions are favorable. So you're going to see that those animals who fall under this category tend to align with that biology. Now I'm going to give you guys a quiz, small quiz, on which animal you think uses day length as a key regulator. I'm gonna give you like a couple seconds to like think it to yourself and like take a guess on which animal could have potentially contributed to why we think that this makes sense, and why no one thought some time ago that we should challenge the problem. Although I will say a lot of the studies I pulled from the older papers, they're not new. Those studies are from like the 80s or 90s. So we've had this idea since the 80s or 90s. And one of the challenges is that the dissemination of information from the scientific community out to the public is very slow, because very few scientists who are doing cutting edge research want to also be a public educator and stand in this communication space. That is the primary reason I wanted to start the Budgie Academy as a scientist, to try to bridge that gap, pull the papers, translate them into something that we can understand from a layperson perspective, that anyone can understand and apply. So we're no longer having this problem where the research is just bubbled up in the university where nobody can access, even though we've known something for like 30 years, but actually take it out and bring it out into the general public. So I'll give you 5 seconds to think, 5 more seconds to think what animal you think is a day length regulated breeder. Ready? It's probably not going to surprise you. Chickens. Chickens are a highly day length regulated breeder. They are one of our most commonly found birds in captivity. The domesticated chicken, which is descended from the red jungle fowl, is very, very day length dependent. They require long day length in order to trigger their breeding, along with their other conditions like diet and things like that. But day length is a crucial factor in triggering breeding in chickens. So it's very interesting. I think that this is why it didn't catch on as early as it could have, because it made sense. You know, biologically, these pathways exist. We had been exposed as a scientific community to birds who breed this way for many, many, many years. And a lot of the current nutritional requirements that we use for parrots came from chicken diets. We've tested it on chicken diets, determined them on chicken diets, and then tested it on parrots, and then slowly adjusted it as we saw how parrots reacted to various levels of different nutrients. The other thing I wanted to mention is I think there's a correlation and causation thing here. So here in the US, when the days get longer, the temperature also gets warmer. So I think one of the things that happen here is that because people see, oh, you know, they tend to breed during the spring and summer, the days are lengthening, like that makes sense, you know. But this is an important thing of correlation versus causation. Like just because it's happening at the same time doesn't necessarily mean that that's the thing that's causing it. So it starts to beg the question, if it's not the day length is not the key regulator, what else is it, right? Because we do see a lot of parrots here in the US start breeding during the spring and summer season. Fitzy is a fantastic example, right? If she is truly an opportunistic breeder, why was she only breeding during the spring and summer? Like that didn't make sense, right? And the answer is temperature. Temperature is the answer. And it explained a lot of why Fitzy, as she would lay each year, earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier she would come into seasons. The Earth's rotation is not changing. I moved from upstate New York to Boston, so I didn't make a huge shift in the latitude of where I was living. But we have had increasingly mild winters. And every year, the temperature gets warmer earlier and earlier in the year. And so this was a really interesting thing. And if you look at this particular paper, it's a little bit older and kind of a review, but even in there, we do see the mention of temperature as a key regulator, or at least one of the factors that contributes to increased hormone production. So temperature for budgies is a really crucial factor, and it makes a lot of sense from a biological standpoint, because when the temperature is warmer, it's safer for the eggs. The eggs need to be maintained at a body temperature incubated by the female. So if it's really cold outside, one, there's a lot of energy expenditure by the parents simply to keep warm, to keep their body temperature up, eat enough to keep their body temperature up. But it makes sense that animals would have evolved to be more likely to breed, as these animals at least, more likely to breed in the areas that is warmer. If it's too hot, excessively hot, or excessively cold, both will inhibit the breeding. So we see excessively high temperatures because it's so hot. In order to cool themselves, birds do not sweat. They will open their mouth and pant in order to use evaporative cooling to cool themselves, but that will increase the water loss of their body. So excessively high temperatures will tend to inhibit breathing, and excessively cold temperatures as well. And this particular paper I pulled, it's written by an avian veterinarian and his partner, who is a geologist in Australia. So they did a very long study of breeding behaviors in wild budgies. And one of the key things that they mentioned is the budgies will breed when food is available and temperature is also in the right range. There are areas of Australia where there is food, there is water, the calorie density is there, but it's excessively cold and they tend not to breed during those times. So that makes a lot of sense because when I had Fitzy during the winter, I could feed her anything. It didn't matter how high I drove the calorie content. She would not breed, no cavity seeking, nothing. And it was really interesting. And it wasn't until looking at it in hindsight, now knowing what I know now, that makes a lot of sense. So do other parrots have this? Is this unique to budgies? Do other parrots respond to temperature? And the answer is yes, warm temperatures we do see this particular trend in other parrots as well, because all parrots would share that similar survival challenge. If they lay eggs, then the incubation behaviors would be more difficult in excessively cold or excessively hot temperatures. And this is something that Pamela has observed for over 3 decades, consistently observing warmer temperatures such as like 75 or 85 degrees. It is a strong trigger for hormone production. So if we see a parrot come in with excessive hormone production and we have the opportunity to lower the temperature, like maybe by changing the room the bird is in or changing the house conditions, that is something we might look to do to bring it more into the low 70s to a more comfortable temperature. And I've observed the same. Most of my clients are budgies, as you can imagine, because of my focus. But I've observed the same in various clients around the world. So I put this photo of Miss Cookie. So Cookie is actually one of 2 budgies owned by one of my clients in Singapore. And as you can imagine, in Singapore, we're working with some high temperatures and high humidity year round. And it was very interesting for Miss Cookie because she actually came in for some training because she was afraid of people, but also some pretty severe biting problems. She was showing some very serious biting and aggression issues. So she would, when offered food, ignore the food and just bite the hand very, very powerfully. And it was with quite enthusiasm. So it was really an interesting behavior. So we adjust her diet, we fix the calorie density, and that removed about 80% of the biting. But there was just that little bit of biting that just wouldn't quite go away. And I told the owner at the time, I said, working in Singapore, the temperature is always going to be a challenge for us. And then one day I thought, wait, do you have air conditioning? And she said, yes. And I said, can we turn on the air conditioning? And she said, of course. So we turned on the air conditioning to just bring it down to more of the low 70s. And it helped tremendously. And once we brought the temperature down a little bit, it allowed her to stop biting for long enough that we could build a different communication system. So now when she's frustrated, she doesn't immediately resort to biting. But that particular adjustment was really crucial in that last little bit of the behavior that was left over. So Miss Cookie is very happy now, recalling and flying in her house. She's very delightful. So, quick summary, and then we will go to Q&A. So, calorie density is key. Calorie density is a key trigger for hormone production. It's something we always want to look at in the diet while making sure that the diet meets all of their nutrient requirements. Day length is not a strong reproductive trigger for all species of parrots. It's really important that we reevaluate this 12 hours of darkness statement that we've been hearing so routinely. Excessive darkness can increase hormonal behaviors, and it can increase the risk factor for other behavior problems like shadow destructive behavior. Adequate temperatures are usually required for parrot breeding. This is probably not shocking to anyone, but overly warm temperatures sometimes can contribute to that increased hormone production and breeding associated behaviors. And the good thing is all of these things are within our control, right? We can adjust the diet. We can, to some degree, adjust the temperature, and we can adjust lighting conditions for our birds. So all of these things are within our control, and we can make these very intentional adjustments, incremental adjustments to produce a better living system for an overall happier, healthier parent, but of course also a happier, healthier us, right? Because hormones is something that's very challenging for us as human beings to live with in our homes. So that is all I have. I will take any questions. I'll let Anne jump back on and moderate.
Wow, that was super informative and so important to how we move forward, I think. And all the, especially if you've had birds a long time, some of the things you mentioned were, sleep, keep it warm, blah, 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 were all part of the baseline of some of the early thinking about parrot care. Of course, those are changing, but I think your current research is going to just pivot that forward faster. So kudos to you and the really important work you're doing. I'm so impressed. I think, we can't do enough of that right now because parrots in captivity are always a challenge, right? And but that hormonal issue pops up all the time, and you have some recipes to help make that not happen for many birds, I think. I'm just so excited. Okay, we have a ton of questions. So many that I didn't even start to combine them into coherent things. So we may kind of jump around a little bit, but
Of course, yeah.
a lot of people, of course, would like to know more about what constitutes a calorie dense food.
Yeah.
Pasta, carbs, of course, scratch
Yeah.
those from the diet. Seed, hopefully mostly scratch from the diet. Anything else you could say about that in terms of different kinds of pellets or food?
Yeah. So so something that Kirk from UC Davis found is that on the lower end of the calorie density, it's somewhere around 2.7 calories per gram. Generally in that range, most of these opportunistic style breeders like budgies, cockatiels, lovebirds will tend to also kind of follow that range. So in that range of calories, between like 2.7-ish calories per gram, generally you will not see breeding. Raising it just in his flock, he raised it to 3.1 calories per gram. That alone was enough to trigger the cockatiels to breed. And in that case, he has an aviary with cockatiels as a flock. So there's always the vocals as well. They have pair bonded mates, and then they will present a nest box. So the 3.1 calorie per gram is around the threshold. If you turn it even higher, most seeds are in the 3.4 to 3.5. So if you have something like millet, wheat, like these types of grains are going to be more in like the 3.4, 3.5. Some lipids like fats have much higher calorie density per gram. So nuts, for example, like sunflower seeds and other nuts, because they have more fats, they will be even higher in calorie density. It's a little bit hard to compare apples and oranges because once you're talking about whole foods, they don't absorb 100% of what's in the food. Nuts, for example, are very rarely absorbed at 100% of the calories. So carbs, for example, are much more readily absorbed. And that's why we usually see items like pasta will really seem to send their hormones soaring. So it depends on the species where the line is, because the opportunistic style breeders like the budgies, the cockatiels, they have a much more rigid threshold because of their evolutionary style, versus for the non-opportunistic breeders, as long as you keep it in this like relatively controlled range and control their other species specific factors, especially like physical stimulation and things like that, it will be fine. But for the opportunistic breeder species, their calorie threshold tends to be a bit lower.
Can we see that on the package? Do we look on the package to see?
That's the tricky thing about it. Why I think it didn't come up until now is because it's never printed on the package.
Exactly.
because we always were from a nutrition standpoint, people were aiming to get them enough calories. We were never thinking it's too much calories. Like people weren't thinking of that.
People food. Can we tell it with people food though, with the descriptions?
Right. So with people food, yeah, anything that is calorie dense and refined. So for example, like heavy carb things, I would say like pasta, like refined breads. I know parrots love French fries. So really limited on those high calorie table foods.
Anything processed is generally not too good for us either. Yeah.
Yes, and because they don't have any fiber, so they don't fill up the animal either. So and they are, I admit, French fries are very tasty, but it's probably not shocking that you should probably not give French fries to your bird for a myriad of reasons, but it does also fall under the category of high calorie human table foods that parrots probably should not be eating.
Would you put like sweet potatoes in that category, which is a common parrot food?
I probably wouldn't say, because sweet potatoes, even though they are like a root tuber and they have carbohydrates, but they also have fiber. And it's not, and that fiber takes up space and it takes time to digest. So it's a matter of the amount, right? If they're just eating globs and globs and globs of steamed sweet potato, like that's probably not ideal. But if you're shaving some sweet potato a little bit in with your, mixture of greens and vegetables and brassicas and various different kinds of produce, that's probably less of an issue. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. Would you say most vegetables, corn being the exception, would be low calorie density? So yes. In other words, feed all the vegetables in the world, right?
Like leafy greens, like these types of like cruciferous vegetables, like any of the brassicas, like because leafy greens, also because most vegetables are mostly water. So, and not only are they mostly water, a lot of it is fiber. So it's not going to trigger hormones that way. So yeah, anything like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, like these
Brussels sprouts,
like they will not contribute to higher hormones.
What about fruit?
Yeah, fruits are kind of interesting because even though, well, the important thing to understand, I tell my clients about fruit, is that what we call fruit from a culinary perspective is not really scientifically a fruit, right? Like scientifically, from a botanical perspective, a fruit is when a plant has a flower and the flower gets pollinated and it grows this thing with the seed in it in order to disperse its seed, right? That is a means of reproduction for the plant. So like a zucchini is a fruit. Like a cucumber is a fruit, a tomato is technically a fruit, a pumpkin is a fruit, so when we say fruit, like kind of what does that mean? So one of my clients said that, my parrot loves these vegetables, but won't eat fruit. Like I thought this bird was supposed to be kind of frugivorous in the wild. And I was like, well, what does he like? And he's like, he likes jalapenos. And I'm like, but a jalapeno is a fruit, like a jalapeno is a flower which is pollinated and then grows with the seed. So I'm like, that is, so yeah, like peppers is not a problem. So that bird particularly likes the little like jalapenos. And I'm like, you can have
vitamin A.
Yeah, if you want to have jalapenos, you can have jalapenos. It's not a problem.
But things like berries or oranges or apples or pears, I mean, things that sometimes the New World birds really like. Are those more calorie dense?
So it depends on the fruit, but the fruits have fiber. It's not the same as straight sugar or straight carbs. So a lot of the fruits also come with an amount of fiber. So I wouldn't say to never feed a fruit. I would just say choose carefully, which fruits you feed and the proportion that we feed, and to look at the species that we're feeding. That's kind of an important thing. I often have budgie owners come and be like, my budgie refuses to eat cantaloupe. I'm like, it's okay if they don't eat the cantaloupe. It's okay, I promise. They don't have to.
It's not really a natural food for a budgie.
Right, it doesn't quite make sense for them. But I would look carefully at the species, but fruit is not even though like a lot of human grown fruits are higher now, they've been selected and bred for higher sugar content because we like the taste, but it still does have fiber. So a limited intentional amount, and to look carefully at this bird's exact situation, right? Like if this bird has a particular health condition, okay, maybe we need to just be careful with it, you know? So one of the things I try to explain to people is how to watch your bird and adjust, lean the diet one way or the other. So it's not like they're blindly just feeding what I say to feed. It's more about learning the science. So for example, one of my clients, she has 3 budgies, 2 of which on a particular mixed diet do just fine. No hormones, nothing. One of them is a female that becomes a flying beaver, in the sense that she becomes so hormonal, she's chewing everything and like cavity seeking, like really high levels hormonal behavior. And I said, just back it down a little bit. So you know which calorie foods I identify for each client. Okay, for you, this is your lowest calorie food, medium, like, you know, medium low, medium high, and your reinforcers, which are like your highest value ones, right? And I said, if you're seeing that behavior, it means it's too high. Just increase the proportion of this food and slightly decrease the other one. So you can tilt it more in your favor. And then also that when the winter comes, it's cold, you can probably be a bit more liberal and you probably won't see the same effect in that particular case because of where she lives. And this is another thing why I tell people, like, individualized attention is really crucial, rather than trying to blanket this like, oh, budgies need to eat this, because my clients whose budgie lives in Canada will not face the same challenges as the budgie living in Singapore because of that temperature and humidity. So I know it's very frustrating because when people ask about nutrition, they're like, just tell me what to feed. And I'm like, it depends. I'm sorry. Like,
you have this 3-pronged thing, or really 2-pronged now, calorie density and temperature. And it sounds like, you know, those are all
yeah, you can
be adjusted to that environment.
Yeah. And there's more things. Yeah, like eventually we'll talk about more things like nest box is kind of obvious, right? That one is kind of an easy solve. Just don't give your bird the nest box. So that one is like a little less analysis and also kind of more obvious to the eye. So we don't have to analyze it as much. Some other things is like physical stimulation is a big one. Like one of the main things I changed for the Indian ringneck that was plucking all her feathers out. And I said, we have to change the way we handle the bird, because she was being so stimulated by the way that they were being handled that it was, and it's always very interesting because sometimes I'll get clients who do it for a while and then they're like, oh, maybe it's okay now. They stop plucking. Maybe I can stop. And then they'll put the bird back.
But he loves me. Yes.
Yeah, and they start doing it again and the plucking starts again. And they're like, oh, no, I learned my lesson. I'm like, okay, that's fine.
We're like, mammals. It's hard not to touch. Yeah.
We're not only mammals, we're primates of all things. We are just, my coworker brought her dog yesterday just to visit in the yard. And I was like, oh my goodness, you know, because we are just, this is the human thing, right? So.
There was a lot of questions, as you can imagine, about different pellets. And I'm sure you have to be careful about what you say about different companies, but is there a way for people to understand and make decisions about different pellets? Yeah, so one of the reasons that, again, it depends, you know, one of the things about it is that this is a bit individualized by species. So because the different species have different nutrient requirements, the different pellets are formulated differently. And a lot of times people want me to say, like, is it good or is it bad? I'm like, it's not that it's good or that it's bad. It's kind of a matching game. This pellet is right for that bird, and this pellet is right for that bird. You know, like I wouldn't feed the same pellet to my budgie as if I had an African gray, for example, right? The African gray has very different nutrient requirements to the budgie. So it's the right pellet for the African gray is the wrong pellet for the budgie, you know? So, but some things when it comes to choosing pellets, I do look for. So one is it has to meet the nutrient requirements. I'm looking, if sometimes reading ingredient list is very challenging because the ingredient list is listed only by the percentage weight of that ingredient. So if you see something on the ingredient list, it tells you nothing about how much is in there.
they could put the slightest smidgen in there and then put it on the ingredient list, right? Call it fairy dusting, where you just put it there just so that it looks nice on the label. So really what we need is to do a full analysis of some of these, or I would really like a lot more companies to publish their full analysis of their pellets and be willing to share that information. One of the things that I'm doing now is that you can actually analyze the food yourself. So not like yourself, but in contract with a lab. So one of the things I would like to do is pick some different foods we have available to us and do at least a rudimentary analysis and see what we're working with. Mineral analysis is much less expensive. Vitamin analysis is much more expensive. So we can do, you know, a limited analysis, partial analysis on some things. Some pellets, you can calculate to some degree the calorie density, but one of the reasons I specifically want to do the analysis is because if you calculate it based on what's on the bag, we don't know when that analysis was from. You know, it might just be printed on the bag, whether that matches the actual food in there. So there's a little bit of that. Like we can do the math, but I would rather see the true analysis and then do the math. So
wouldn't it be nice if we just had a spreadsheet of it and nobody was stating an opinion or telling you which one to buy or not buy, but people could actually make more informed decisions without us feeling like as an organization or whatever we're saying, feed this pellet, don't feed that pellet. Well, so many pellets are, if you look at the ingredients, they always start with soy, corn, etc. And so that has to give you, that has always given me pause for feeding high level pellets.
The tricky thing about, and I get it, you know, with owners who feel like it's hard to trust these pellet companies sometimes because every single pellet company says that they're the best. And it starts to become really hard to know who's the best. And because the right pellet is different for different species, now we have a situation where even we see variation amongst individual species. So someone might feed this pellet to their budgie and something shows up and they're like, oh no, it's that pellet. And then they feed something else and this is some other issue. And they're like, that pellet's causing that issue. But you know, really, if you look at it from an experienced eye, like it's none of those things. It's actually
a holistic view of everything in the environment too. Yeah. So
it starts to create. So this is why I tell people there's really no replacement for individualized attention with someone who's going to look at your specific situation, because that budgie living in Singapore will never face the challenges of the budgie living in Canada. Like, you know, so
I assume that you feel like sprouting is a positive thing, right? Because it's a live plant, low calorie density.
So sprouting, you have to choose the right ingredients for the right species. So choosing the right ingredients is key, because you can, for example, the different grains vary by protein and they vary by their amino acid profile, right? So some have more calcium, some have less calcium, some have more of this thiamine, vitamin B1, some have more zinc, some have different things, right? So it's not like a blind mishmash, right? It's important that we choose, okay, I'm specifically choosing these ingredients because I need something high in vitamin B1, I need this much percent. And we formulate the diet with intention. One of the strong things about sprouting, what sprouting does is that it goes from the dormant seed to a growing plant. And so when it does that, if you look at the publications where they track the changes over time, one of the things that happens is the plant starts to burn off a little bit of the carbohydrate. It's not that much, a little bit, but what they will do is they change their amino acid profile. So when you sprout them, you'll get a little increase in lysine, for example, is one of the essential amino acids that also is very deficient in most seed diets, because a lot of seed diets have a lot of millet, and millet is great in vitamin B content, fantastic, but has very
high in fat.
But also low in lysine. So it has millet has 11 to 13% protein. But of that 11 to 13%, there's not enough lysine to meet their nutrient requirements, right? So I might get another grain like buckwheat, which is higher in lysine to pair, right? So I choose the ingredients based on what nutrients I need to bring to the table in order to check all the nutrient boxes, because there are different levels. Now that we've kept parrots in captivity, one of the advantages of formulated diets is that you can compare apples to apples, right? The only difference between these 3 formulated diets is the level of vitamin B that was added. So you can see, okay, was this enough? Was this enough? Was this enough? You know, what do we see on the different diets? So the nutrient requirements, a lot are still, I wouldn't say a lot. There's still some that are extrapolated from original chicken nutrient requirements, but we're getting much better because now slowly we're getting more studies on this particular nutrient versus that particular nutrient. I'll give you a good example. There's some work from David Phelan back when he was in Sydney University of Sydney, I forget. Yeah. But he's an avian veterinarian and PhD, and he has a fondness for budgies. And so a lot of his work was done in budgies. He published some work showing the disparity between calcium amongst the different species. So budgies, if you give them 0.3% calcium, which is very low as calcium goes, they do just fine. They can even, the babies can even grow up on 3.3% calcium and be fine. It was a little bit not enough for laying. So for the laying female, 0.3% was not enough. But the next dose up was 0.7%, which is still not that high as calcium goes. So 0.7%, but at 0.7% in half of the birds, he could see kidney mineralizations on the kidney because it was too much calcium. Mm-hmm. So a bird who was a budgie who is not laying, eating 0.7% calcium, it's too much. Versus if we were to take a bigger parrot, they might need that 0.7% calcium in order to be okay. 0.3% calcium would be nowhere near enough for, let's say, an African gray, right? So the dose that is required for one parrot will give kidney mineralizations in the other one because it's too much. So these disparities do exist. So that particular paper is very, very interesting. And I really am fond of that work because we've known for a long time that, let's say, to compare to chickens, right? Chickens that are laying 1 egg every single day, they need a huge amount of calcium, much more calcium than is even safe to feed a budgie. So a lot of these like older nutrient requirements before, calcium used to be really high, and now we learned our lesson that that's true of the chicken and not true of the parrot. So now it's been adjusted down. But you'll hear this kind of like rumors on the internet that smaller birds shouldn't eat so much pellet because it's bad for their kidneys, or pellets are hurting the bird's kidneys. Mm-hmm. Back in the day, when pellet levels had calcium levels much higher, perhaps it maybe was true. I'm not old enough to have been alive then, so I think
it was a protein. Only try. It's mostly a protein concern, I think, for the smaller birds. That's how it's raised.
So then, as things progress, now pellets are changing and evolving, and a lot of times I think now it's been some time since we've reformulated. So I think it's about time due for reformulation to bring something new to the market. So we shall see, because a lot of these pellets that we know that they are able to support these animals. We know that they have strong decades of data supporting that they are able to meet the nutrient requirements. It's obvious that they are able to do that. The data is irrefutable at this point.
Definitely better than a packaged seed, crappy seed diet. Right.
But as more research comes out, we can continue to evolve, right? Again, we reformulate to improve. For example, like vitamin supplements inside the pellet used to be very different than what they are now. Something I hear a lot, like people will say that parrots who eat pellets still get vitamin A deficiency symptoms. And it makes me wonder, how old is that information? Because back in the day, when they were adding vitamin A to a pellet, it was straight vitamin A, like pure vitamin A. But pure vitamin A is not very stable from a chemical standpoint.
Not soluble. So we definitely see that. We see birds that come only on pellets who are vitamin A deficient. So
yes.
There be some potential
So back in the day, yeah, we would use only vitamin A. Slowly, we evolved and realized, oh, if we put the vitamin A together with this other nutrient, it will protect the vitamin A. So it became a little more stable. Now we evolved a little bit more. If we protect the vitamin A, which is a teeny bit of fat, it will protect it even further. One of the things I tell all of my clients is how you store your pellets is really important, especially for me, because we work with budgies and people have one budgie and then they buy a bag of pellets that's like huge. It's really important because if you have this huge 2-pound bag of pellets and you open the bag, scoop out what you need for the day, and you're just leaving it open, exposed to the light, exposed to the oxygen, pellets don't rot, like in the sense that they've been developed so that they don't rot and spoil, but they do not defy the laws of physics and chemistry itself. They will still degrade with exposure to light, with exposure to oxygen, and especially at higher temperatures, it happens faster. So usually for most of my clients, I say, if you can, I would like the pellet frozen, especially if you have just one budgie or 2 budgies and a 2-pound bag of pellets, so once we choose the right form, especially the pellet, like the other formulated foods, but the pellet, I prefer them freeze it. Every time you open the bag, open it, take what you need for the day, press all the air out of the bag, seal it, and put it back in the freezer. And that way you're not just letting it sit out exposed to the light and the oxygen and the sun.
Right.
Yeah. And then it's like a 6-month-old bag of pellets, and they've been feeding one budgie for 6 months on this one bag of pellets, and then wonder why they have various symptoms.
Minimal value, right?
Yeah, have various health situations that show that they have some kind of deficiency. And so I know sometimes it's aesthetic to take the pellet out of the bag and put it in like a glass container or a plastic container. I know it's aesthetic, but you can't
convenient.
But you cannot press the air out of the bag, and you cannot protect it from the light anymore. So I know it's aesthetic. I know it's pretty, and it's convenient, but there's a reason that the bags or a lot of pellets come in that material. It's opaque or it's dark in color to protect it from the light. And there's a reason it's plastic or metal lined and not paper. So there's like all these logistics of like food preservation and formulation that go into these things. But one thing I would say, like very concrete that you can do as an owner, like today, right now, without changing anything else, is just make sure you're storing the pellet properly.
Right. That's a really good takeaway from today.
Yeah, because it's easy, it's free, you don't have to do anything, like just.
Right. And they're expensive, so you might as well preserve the integrity as much as you can, right?
Yeah, and especially if it's a solid portion of the bird's diet.
Right.
Because the assumption is that this pellet has the analysis that it was originally formulated to be. And if it's not stored properly, it's no longer that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
if you're an IAABC member, let me just throw this in the middle of your secret code to get credit for today is calorie density. So just email us at contact@phoenixlanding.org and we'll give you the code for IAABC. Okay, you've opened the door to lots of different issues. Somebody wants to know about the molting pattern in budgies. I mean, and what does it mean? And is it healthy for them? I think they molt more than any other parrot species I've seen. There just seem to always be molting, little feathers everywhere.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What's right?
So it's interesting because I don't think we've actually studied it that extensively. Like there could be more. There are some older publications which not dictate, but like document the order in which they molt. So we have some data about the order in which they molt, but the timing of the molt is not that well understood. So it's really interesting. And whenever we come to one of these, I always say it's kind of like a study yet to be done, like as an idea for a study that someone should do.
We nominate you. Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, sometimes I think I'm like, oh my God, somebody needs to do this. But yeah, I don't think the data is that strong yet. We don't have too much information on exactly what factors dictate the molt, but with the molt, one of the things a lot of people will say is that, oh my God, I need to feed them some special molting food. For budgies, at least with the data that we have, the molts, when they lose a little bit of feather, they slightly lose a little bit of insulation. And birds regulate, just like any other animal, they regulate their food intake amount by how much calories they're expending. So for example, if they're burning a certain amount of calories, they will eat more to adjust in order to match it, right? If they burn less calories, they tend to eat a little bit less. And if they burn more calories, they will eat more. And if your food is less calorie dense, they'll just eat more of the food to make it match. One of the things we see happens is when you eat a high calorie dense food, birds will also tend to overeat their total food amount, as well as the food already being too high in calorie density. And I think it's because even though they're only burning this many calories per day, when they eat this many calories worth of the food, the second parameter is physical fill. So they haven't eaten enough to feel full. So they eat a little more to fill their physical fill. Now they've overshot their daily calories. So that's why sometimes you'll see like weight issues or a little bit of extra weight on birds who are eating an excessive calorie diet. So I'll give you an example, like a budgie who's not breeding, who's being put on a breeding calorie level diet, tends to be very overweight. And it's not because it's not meeting the requirements, it's because it's too many calories, because it's too calorie dense. So for the calorie density, one thing I want to mention for the calorie density is that some people will ask me, oh, so can I just feed them less of a calorie dense food? Will that fix it? And the answer is no, because the bird, once the calorie density is there, they will continue to seek out more of those high calorie dense foods. So then they're just hungry and hormonal at the same time. So we've seen this effect where I originally thought, yeah, if this calorie dense pellet or this seed mix is too much, let's say hypothetically, even if that seed mix could be balanced, could we just feed less so that it equals how much calories they're supposed to eat per day? It does not work. They will, because it doesn't meet their physical fill. So this bird is hungry. And because it's still triggering the calorie density is what triggers their pathways, they're still hormonal. Because they're hormonal and hungry at the same time. So that's also why I tell people, if you have a bird who's overweight, don't just take and reduce their food. We have to reformulate the diet so that they can meet their nutrient requirements, but be full. You have to meet their physical fill. Just reducing how much food they eat is not going to solve the problem.
If they're eating, if the diet is too calorie dense, are they also going to get fat? Somebody wanted to know. Would that?
Yeah, if it's too calorie dense, assuming that various nutrient requirements are met, they will be overweight. So you see a lot of birds, for example, that might be overweight. Something that we will see sometimes. So Pally is a really good example. She was eating nothing but seed mix, like only very high calorie seed mix. But she came in very underweight. And a lot of people have this situation where a bird is on a high calorie diet, but they're underweight. So they're like, oh, then the bird needs to eat less. So they restrict the bird's food. But the problem is the reason that bird was underweight is because they're not getting their nutrient requirements met. They're not getting, usually what they're not getting enough of is the protein. So when they don't eat enough protein or essential amino acids, when the amino acids are not coming in from the diet, it has to come from somewhere in order to keep their body running. And where it generally comes from is they take it from the muscle. So you will sometimes see these birds that are really underweight, despite being on a high calorie diet. And the solution is not to take food from the bird, because if that diet was this high in calories and completely deficient in calcium, if you only let them eat, let's say half, now it's even more deficient in calcium because now they're eating even less grams of calcium per day than they were before. So it's not solving the problem. They need.
Does that make quinoa a really good grain because it's got all 22 amino acids?
Quinoa is considered complete because of the various levels of essential amino acids. So there's our 20-something amino acids. Of the amino acids, 9 are essential. For budgies, 1 is semi-essential when they're younger. That's kind of another story for another time. And then there's the non-essential amino acids. Every single plant will have all of them. It's the levels that are different. So it's not like one plant is going to have zero methionine, because methionine is required for the plant to live. It's just that the level will be super low, so that it doesn't meet the requirement of the bird, right? Because every single cell, this is kind of getting into cellular physiology a little bit, but every single cell, in order to make their proteins, use all 20 amino acids. It's just that the levels are different. But quinoa is a very useful food because of its essential amino acid profile. Yeah. And it's not overly carby.
There's quite a few questions about climate. Oh, and there was a question also about UV light. What do you think about UV light? And I know that's kind of
yeah,
it's all relative, depends on how much sunlight, time of day, blah, blah, blah. So
yeah, so the take-home message we can all agree for UV light is you cannot replace the natural sunlight with a light bulb. That physics is not happening. No matter what the marketing is, no matter what the company says, you cannot replace true sunlight, actual nuclear reactions by a star in this outer space filtered through our atmosphere. It will never be replaced truly by a light bulb. That's the reality of the situation. No amount of marketing is going to fix that. So what can we do, though, to do our best, right? To get what we can get. So one is for lighting at least a consistent rhythm every day. You don't want to be waking your bird up at 11 on one day and 8 the next day and 6 one day and then 9 one day. It's like all over the place. You want some kind of consistent daily rhythm so that they manage their circadian rhythm properly. For UV bulbs, one of the things you want to be careful of is because the industry is not regulated. So this is very common in parrot supplies. The industry is not regulated. So you're going to see a lot of bulbs market themselves as full spectrum. But because it's not regulated, full spectrum doesn't mean anything from a legal.
Right, or UVA versus UVB is a big difference, right?
Yes, exactly. So they might say like contains UV. If they're not showing me a spectrum of the actual amount of UV and all the different like waves, I have a hard time trusting that company, because that is a tool to produce that graph is such a simple tool that even your average lighting enthusiast for like plants or something else, like your average person could buy on Amazon a meter to measure that, so it's such a simple but crucial piece of information to go alongside with this light to show how much of each wavelength in UVA or UVB or whatever is there. So based on that criteria, almost no companies will meet the cut, meet the bar. It's such a simple piece of information, and it's, to me, I wouldn't be comfortable putting a UV light if I did not see that information first, because excessively high UV on a poorly mounted or
dangerous.
is dangerous.
Yeah.
And the amount of the UV determines how far we need to mount it from the bird. And the thing about birds is they are not lizards.
Right.
So lizards or snakes have this natural basking behavior where they sit under the light and bask for maybe hours at a time. And that is their natural behavior. But when was the last time you saw a bird just sit still and do nothing for hours at a time? Especially for a lot of us where our birds are in our house, just
right,
frolicking about, and then you have one UV light that's just in the corner of the cage. How many minutes of exposure is that bird getting a day? Next to none, right?
Yeah, it's definitely an area that needs some more evolution. Yeah,
Yeah,
especially the birds who can't go outside and could benefit from some UVB, right?
Yes. So the question is, if we do create a bulb with some UVA and UVB, which the lighting technology eventually over time will evolve as well, because right now all the UV lights are tubular fluorescent lights, or they're compact fluorescent bulbs. And one of the things I don't like about it is it's very hot. So, and also because it's shiny. So some birds who are very triggered by the shininess will go and look at the reflector, and that's a little bit undesirable for me. But eventually it will evolve, it will continue to evolve. But let's say, just for the visibility, can the parrots maybe see different things? I suspect so, but it's hard to tell because we don't really have the data. So more research to be done here. Yeah.
Going safely outside is always the optimal way to go if you can, right?
Yeah. There's
Safely being the important term there. Don't just go park them in a tree.
Right. You know, if you have the opportunity for building an aviary, amazing. You know, like if, like I just moved into this house not long ago. We have a deck that connects to the kitchen. I would like to close it into an aviary so I can just open the kitchen door and be like, go.
Yeah. Wonderful.
But, or, you know, if they can go out in a travel carrier and hang out with me for a bit. I know here for us in the Northeast, it's not always an option. It's October already. You know, we have,
of course, we know now after today, we don't always need that high temperature. So yeah, my birds actually prefer being outside in the lower temperatures also.
Yeah. So like a moderate temperature, you know, 70 is perfectly fine. It does not have to be 78 would be hot. But yeah, I mean, it's, if you have the opportunity, there's no replacement for real sunlight. And not just the sun, you know, there's like the stimulus, like the wind and the air, and you know, it will never be the
feathers, their phyloplumes, as Dr. Orez says, the feather that connects to the nerve, that connects to the brain, and that little phyloplume. So getting a breeze on the phyloplumes is mentally enriching. Yeah.
So
back to budgies again, or any bird really, but since they're seed eaters in the wild, can you say, you know, aren't grains to some extent a natural food for them, whether dry, soaked, sprouted, cooked, whatever? Grains are so versatile.
Yeah, so I think this will explain a lot about like the naturalness of food. Like if you go to and watch these birds and what they eat, we've left the realm of natural in mid 1850. Like when we brought that bird into captivity, we left the realm of natural food. So any food that we feed our birds now is in no way resembling what they eat in the wild. I mean, that nutrient profile is completely different. If you read that paper that I showed by Rob Marshall, and he has a book called the Budgerigar, but in that paper, he lists various species of plants that those budgies eat. You will not find that in any supermarket, specialty store, ever. So that type of food item is not accessible to us. So the question is, what can we do, right? What can we do as parrot owners? The good news is that birds from the inside the intestine, if they were an intestinal cell, they care about the nutrients that come in, because when they eat the food, they digest the food and break it down and then absorb all the various components. So as long as we're stacking it back up to meet their nutrient requirements, we will be able to support this animal, right? That's why we can feed something like a pellet and sustain an animal for potentially a long time, because it's meeting all of the nutrient requirements, even though it's nowhere near their food that they had evolved to eat, right? But you will see these species specific differences, like budgies will take to seed much easier, right? They look at a grain and they understand that this looks more like food, right? It's easier to introduce a conure to more vegetation sometimes than it might be to some of the other birds. But one of the things about budgies is that if you read like their natural biology, they're not just eating dry seed. I think that's kind of the things that appeals to people. Like when they look at a dry seed mix, they're like, this is a natural food. But when you look at these birds in the wild, they're not eating this dry seed.
Wet. They're sprouting.
Yes. They are going through, and often when still green on the stalk. So when these birds go through, many parrots in Australia get regarded as pests because of that behavior where they go through and just tear through with the vegetation. but budgies have a natural instinct to eat greens. A lot of people who have budgies have probably noticed this already. Like I very rarely do any kind of like targeted teaching to train a bird to eat like a whole leaf of, I don't know, bok choy or whatever green that I have that week. Very rarely. I know they have the instinct to eat leafy greens. It's in there. I just have to bring out that instinct so they dare to act on it from a behavioral perspective. So usually for these birds, they come in, yeah, I'll get them on a mixture of formulated diets and then some fresh food mixture with the veggies chopped in there at first. But if I want them to eat that like whole leaf for the enrichment and the funsies, I usually just train them. As they learn to target, they learn to step up, they feel comfortable in the space, they start to I reinforce their ability to make their own decisions in the space, and they will start to act on their instinct. And if very often I just hang whatever big leaf of whatever it is that I have that week, and they just eat it like a little caterpillar. They just
exactly, especially get it wet, clip it to the side of the cage.
And that's the end, So when we say natural foods, I would say like this kind of the takeaway, like one, no ingredient in the supermarket is anything like they eat in the wild. And two, it's more about the nutrient profile.
So how do you feel about like packaged seed mixes for the smaller birds? I wouldn't do that for the larger birds for sure, but how do you feel about that for like budgies and cockatiels?
So
like husbands or something.
It's very difficult to package a seed mix and meet all nutrient requirements while being low enough in calories. It's very difficult.
So even as a part of the diet, or you just mean as the whole diet?
I mean, I definitely wouldn't feed it as the whole diet, but as a portion of the diet. So for example, if you feed it as a portion of the diet, I would want to see what kind, because there's always going to be that reinforcer portion, right? Let's say we use spray millet to train, right? I actually have an article in my community that says, is spray millet junk food? Because I think a lot of owners feel guilty, like, oh my God, they're told that spray millet is junk food. It's not junk food. It's actually a very useful drought resistant grain that's very high in vitamin B.
especially if you grow it fresh.
Yeah, it's actually, it's low in calcium. Yeah, it's low in lysine, but it's high in vitamin B. Some other things are not high in vitamin B, right? So it's not this like it's not a French fry. It's just that it has a particular nutrient profile. And that particular profile needs to be matched with the correct other ingredients to complete the nutrient requirement needs of this animal, right? So it would depend on the seed mix, but I find that most seed mixes are going to be over the 3.1 calories per gram.
Two calorie dense. So better to go back to veggie for a budgie. Better to go back to there's veggies and pellets. Is that what you're saying?
There's going to be, it's usually a mix. So for example, like I might have a base pellet for them to fall back onto, and then some supplemented seed-based foods, because it's a small granivore. They will never eat vegetables the same way a macaw might eat vegetables. It's never going to be the same. So I'm always adding some seed-based foods, but it depends on the products, like which product, because a lot of times people will be like, look, this seed mix, and like not all seed mixes are made equal either, right? So some seed mixes are very, we'll call it very blonde.
Pretty iffy. Yeah.
Yeah, like you'll just see it's just white millet, red millet, and canary seed. Maybe there's oats in there. Like that's nowhere close to complete, right? Even the protein profile is not complete. But if you kind of turn the other way, if you were to try to make a seed mix that's complete, it's difficult. It's very, very difficult because the vitamin A is never going to be there in a dry seed, right? It was there when it was a green seed on the stalk, but by the time it's grown and dry and then it falls, like it's gone, so a lot of
the takeaway for people today, if you want them to like take away what it is they should really focus on for the diet, what would that be?
For takeaway for budgies, I would say is one, definitely have the budgies diet formulated properly. Like have someone look and formulate it properly, make sure the calorie density is right. And there's going to be a bit of seed in the diet, but choosing the proper product is crucial. Because
are we back to veggies, pellets, seeds basically is our three?
Yeah, I would say a base. Yeah, like a base pellet and then some formulated foods that incorporate some seed-like component and then the fresh produce. Yeah.
You know, you were talking one of your three-prong focus today. When I think about daylight and temperature, one of the things I notice sometimes is birds that living in captivity as we approach the winter months, we leave the lights on longer, we turn up the heat, we do things that simulate spring, which I think, does that not also simulate hormonal behavior to some extent?
I often wonder that. So one of my friends said that the other day that, maybe in the winter, as we turn up the heat, now it's even warmer in the house.
Exactly.
And whereas it wasn't that warm before, and now it's 75 degrees, it kind of depends on how people manage their house. It's funny for me because I don't turn up the heat that high. So I just keep it, not cold, but I don't turn it that high. So for me, I see the fluctuation as it fluctuates with the outside because of the way that I manage the space. But I could see that depending on how someone manages the space, if they turn up the heat high enough.
Especially if the birds are near a vent, which I find so uncomfortable for birds and their sinuses. But people say all the time, they're still part of that kind of old thinking. Oh, it has to be 75 degrees in the house.
Oh no.
Which to me is like, oh, so oppressive. Yeah, 60, 65 is better for me. And I kind of think probably for the birds too. So to have it less warm in the winter is probably a tool in the toolbox that people.
Oh yeah, budgies as a species are very temperature tolerant. So if you follow these birds in the wild, the big thing is they do not tolerate large fluctuations. Large sudden fluctuations in temperature are not tolerated. So if it's 70 degrees inside, you don't want to just take them out into 30-degree weather in a travel cage. Like that's not going to do it. That's not safe. But let's say it's 62 degrees in your house and it was, slowly over a period of weeks, like the weather's just been cooling and then it's 62 degrees in your house. Like that bird is fine.
Yeah. In the wild, it fluctuates quite a bit sometimes.
Yeah.
From my experience in South America, it can be 50 plus degrees difference morning to night. So
yes, exactly. Yeah. It's over the span of hours. It changes and then over the span of hours, it changes back.
Not a sudden, right.
It's just not like 70 and then 30 seconds later 30. Like that's too much, right? So,
right. But that's a little shocking.
Yeah, the fluctuation, but over the period of the day, right? And yeah, like if it's 62 degrees compared to 72 degrees, you might see your budgies eat a tad bit more to make up for that small increase in energy expenditure to maintain their body temperature. But it's so minute that you may or may not see any difference. Only when you start to really go down in temperature, you'll see them eat a bit more. But I really doubt anyone's house would ever get to the point where it's that cold.
They need that many more calories, right?
I doubt it. I don't think you could sit comfortably in your house.
Right.
Temperature.
Another one of those kind of older, from decades ago that started was covering cages, which is something I've frankly never done or really understand. But maybe it was to keep the birds quiet, or maybe it was because we were told they need those 12 hours of sleep, right? Wouldn't that darkness, especially if it was kind of an oppressive cover, cause some issues potentially?
Yeah, so it can potentially. So the thing with covering the cage is that some birds grow used to it as a behavioral cue. So they grow used to seeing this cover and knowing, okay, I'm not going to be disturbed for this many more hours. They kind of know that as a behavioral cue and as a routine. But if they're used to being covered, they can still be covered. It's just that you don't have to cover them 12 hours a day. It's just that the 12 hours is kind of a bit much. I don't cover my birds. I let them rise with the natural sun. I had the great fortune of choosing apartments with good lighting. So it's one of the things that I look for when I look for housing. So yeah, I try to find a place with strong natural lighting, because again, no amount of light bulbs is going to replace actual sun. One day I'll have a house with a skylight, so just to get just good visibility, good color, good color rendering.
It's more mental than it is like UV.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with UV.
Right,
I mean, UVA leakage through windows, it's something like 50%. And it's only in part of the spectrum. Like UVB is 0%, it's completely gone. So it's more just for like the general visibility, just that it's brighter, like.
Right. That's why it's more mental enrichment. I always thought UVB was the important ingredient for absorbing D3. So
yeah, so UVB, this is one of the things it comes to me a lot when I do consults. So UVB is what allows the conversion to synthesize vitamin D3. So that's what they rely on to make vitamin D3, not necessarily to absorb it, but to actually make it from the precursor. Yeah. So for birds right now,
to then absorb calcium. Sorry,
I absorb calcium.
Part of my that's it. There. Yeah, sorry.
Yes. For calcium metabolism, it's required for calcium metabolism. So that's why before we knew about the importance of vitamin D3, people had a lot of egg binding issues, right? Because the birds were not getting vitamin D3. They couldn't process the calcium. No matter how much calcium you seem to put in this diet, the birds still had calcium problems. The eggs were soft shelled when they laid, their egg binding rates were super high. And people were wondering, like, what is going on? And eventually, as the research kind of came out, they were like, oh my God, I think it's the vitamin D3 and hence the UVB. So a lot of people would change like the way they had their aviaries set up. And then we started adding vitamin D3 to the pellet. So when you feed a formulated food, if your bird does not have access to the outdoors, through the formulated food, we add vitamin D3. And right now, vitamin D3, the base nutrient requirement is 500 IUs per kilogram. So most pellets are a little bit higher to give you some space at 1,000 IUs per kilogram, which is a perfectly safe dose. So if your bird has no access to the outdoors whatsoever, like for me in the winter, we don't have that opportunity because it's freezing and it's snowing here. So that amount of formulated food, that vitamin D3 can be added through the diet. Vitamin D comes in two kinds. It comes in vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. Vitamin D2 is completely ineffective in birds. So it's counted as 0. It has the efficacy is so low, it's not worth counting. But vitamin D3 is very well absorbed in birds. So it's important that if your bird has no access to the outdoors whatsoever, we have to find some way to add it to the diet, one way or another. But ideally in the spring, summer, weather is warm, it would be nice to go get some real UVB. Yeah.
I mean, there aren't really many foods that are D3. I mean, that's the only, well, I shouldn't say that. It's one of the benefits of pellets to me is that they have this synthetic D3. Yeah.
Yeah. But D3 can be added in other ways. For example, sometimes people call me from an area of the world where there are no pellets. Sometimes, and
what other sources are there besides sunlight and synthetic D3 in pellets?
It'd have to be a powdered synthetic D3.
Powder.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize to everybody. I have 4 macaws who seem to be intent on joining the conversation.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to know what a healthy budgie weight is.
It depends on the size of your bird. So if you go to your veterinarian, let's say you have an avian veterinarian that you trust, what they'll do is the budgie has a keel bone. So they will feel the amount of muscling and fat that's on the bone. So ask them when they go for their annual wellness, like, how does it feel? Are they a little skinny? Are they a little over? They feel good. If they feel good, you can mark that number down. And it doesn't have to be that exact number, there's a little bit of fluctuation on either side. But if your 35-gram budgie was at a good weight at 35 grams and now they're 50 grams, like that's way too much. Like now they're overweight, right? Or your 35-gram budgie is now 27 grams, like that's terrifyingly low. So just if like the vet is like, okay, 35 grams seems good, that means it's going to be somewhere in that range.
I was trying to find something to attach it to the chat here, but I can't find it fast enough. It's called the bitometer. and
Mm.
it's published in the UK, I think, and it's got a really good visual image of what is the
Mhm.
keel bone versus normal versus cleavage,
Yes.
and a good way to measure
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So a good example is Eva, my green budgie. So when I first adopted her, I was like, ooh, she's kind of overweight. And I took her to the vet and he was like, wow, this budgie is wide. And I
Wow.
was like, is she overweight? He was like, no. And she actually is, her chest is wide like that. And at first I didn't believe him. I was like, are you sure? He's like, oh yeah, this bird is big. So I actually picked her up once and felt her chest relative to the other budgies. And oh yeah, he's not kidding around. It's just her actual body is wide. So for her, she's 42 grams on a normal day.
Wow.
If Fitzy is 42 grams, I'm gonna get an egg within 12 hours. That's because Fitzy is normally 34 grams. She'll go up to 37 if she comes into breeding, and if it's 42, an egg will appear before me very soon. But for Eva, if Eva was 34 grams, oh, she would be like skin and bones. So it's important to kind of gauge, like Gandalf, for example, is tall. If you see him stand next to Sydney, he's much taller than she is. So for him, 100 to 105 is good. She's 92 to 95, something like that. If she was 105 grams, she'd be overweight. So like if you, it's hard to tell, but when they stand next to each other, you can obviously tell Gandalf is like quite a bit taller. He's quite a bit larger. So I would evaluate it individually, especially because some budgies are a little bit more English and they have a little bit of that, and they are bigger. So it's a very common thing where people are like, oh my God, you know, they lost this much of their body weight. And I'm like, or they're like, is my budgie overweight? And I'm like, there's value to having a professional evaluate your bird as an individual so that you get an accurate read and not just guessing.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you have a male and a female cockatiel. I mean, is that not hormonal triggers right there, or at least part of the equation?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. One of the things I tell people all the time is I choose my flock very carefully. So I'm very intentional with the birds that I choose to bring into my home, because that way things run smoothly. For example, when Callie passed away, so I only had Gandalf and Fitzy. Fitzy was like an 8-year-old female budgie. I am not going to go get a 6-month-old baby boy budgie. Like that's going to create all the chaos, right? So what did I do? I got another adult female budgie. So I got Tritzy. I adopted her. So I'm her third home. And then again, I adopted another adult female. So she was like 4.5 years old. Eva was like 4.5, 5 years old. So I got 2 more adult female budgies. When Gandalf was a little bit of a, I wasn't originally planning to adopt a cockatiel. My coworker was like, he's really aggressive and he's attacking me. I have to rehome him. Like, will you please take him? And it was pandemic time. And I thought like, okay, he's going to need a lot of training, but I think I can do it. Okay, let's do it. So I took him in. He just like exists alongside the budgies, but they don't socialize, just parallel activities, which is perfectly fine. And then when I thought about getting another cockatiel, I was looking at various like birds up for adoption. And one of the interesting things about Sydney was she was already an adult, but she actually was hand fed and alone for all these years. And one of the interesting things with her is I thought, I don't think she'll identify with him at all. And that turned out to be true so far. She wants nothing to do with this bird. And he wants nothing to do with her, because he was from his first owner purchased Gandalf from a Petco, and his first owner was a teenage boy, but he had been alone, the only bird all those years as well. So when he first saw her, he was like, I don't know what that is. Same, he treats her exactly like he treats the budgies, kind of as they don't exist. As long as they're not near him, they don't exist. But there's always that advantage of parallel activities from a distance, you know?
It's an ambient relationship, which is actually a positive enrichment for them. Right.
Yeah. And I see him like once in a blue moon. He's doing a very good job of singing at her a little bit from a distance, she could care less.
Mhm.
It might be a little bit stimulating, but for her, the calorie density is everything. It's very, very, very triggering for her. If you keep the calorie density low, she could not care less.
I think you're really onto something, and you need to write a book about this, without putting yourself in a position of having to judge good and bad. Just stating facts of what's what would be super helpful, and then people can make their own
Yeah,
decisions.
I would like to go, and ideally I would like to interview the graduate student who's now graduated, who did the original study in the lab with Dr. Klasing. I would really like that, because my job right now is as an information integrator and communicator, right? To pull the information from various sources, bring it together, and make it accessible for the public. That's kind of my job. And I would really, really like to talk to her, in person, and have her walk me through more than just the conclusion, right? The nuances of her findings. And it's her work. I know what it's like to be a graduate student. It's a lot of work, and it's your life's work. So I would really like I really prefer to interview the
Is that
original.
the information that went into his book? I'm just showing people here that this.
Yes, that is Kurt Klasing's book. I have to check if it's in there, or if it's
so hard to, thank God there are people like you who can synthesize it, because I aspire to read and understand it, because I know he's the best of the best
He
for a
is
lot of
really
diet things. So I knew you were the best of the best when I knew you
Oh,
were connected to him. But we need you to take it one step farther and put it into language that us everyday people can operationalize in our homes with our birds.
yes.
I think it's going to make a big difference for so many birds.
Yeah. And one of the things I do want to mention with the calorie density is really Pamela was instrumental, like crucial to this whole operation, because it was when he was super hormonal. I asked her, because she was my behavior mentor. So I'm like, can we talk about this? Like, what is going on? And she told me that these are the ways that she organizes the diet for these species. And she has all this experience and was very successful in managing the hormones for these species. But it was hard for us to know, like, why that series of diet adjustments works. And of course, like, when someone tells me, like, do it, trust me, I always want to know why,
template,
right?
just
So,
follow it. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm like, I gotta find out why. Like, we're gonna work
Right.
together, and we're gonna find out why. Because she was the first person who was able to kind of link those two things together, the
Right.
energy density and the hormones. But there was like the clarity of like what exact parameter inside the diet it was. And I was very fortunate through a series of, I don't know if it's luck or just because Kirk did his PhD at Cornell. And so I was very fortunate that I learned of his existence through my professors at the time. So it was
Not many people have heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah,
I only have, because Dr. Susan Orris is always quoting him from her book, from her work. So that's why I had to invest in what I could get my hands on from him, but it's still very, very scientific. But there are some avid learners here today who'd really like a lot of references that a lot of the studies that you referenced, and wanted to know if there are ways to get those links or whatever, or should they just look at what you put in the slide and find that online somehow? Or
I mean, one thing I can do is I do have access to the PDFs, so I can send you the PDFs.
Okay. And then, so if you're interested, just email us at contact@phoenixlanding.org, and I'll pass those on. That would be great, because some of us do like to keep absorbing studies and putting together, connecting the dots, so to speak.
Yeah. And it's a lot of the studies, it's like you can't get access to the PDF without paying for it. So, or you have
part of a medical site or a veterinary site, or you
have a license from somewhere. So a lot of it, if you want the PDF, I can share it.
Right. That'd be great. There's still a lot of questions. I don't know. I know we've gone long, but that's because you're so So interesting. So I don't know what time you have, but somebody wanted to know about calorie density, if the glycemic index might be an indicator or be connected to that.
So I wonder this too. One of the observations Pamela made that makes a lot of sense to me, but we don't have, like, we're trying to piece it together still on how this comes together. But one of the observations that she's made is it seems like the refined carbs are more triggering than something like fats that come with fiber, like a nut, right? Even
That makes sense. I mean, it's a processed food. It's the same for us humans, right? I mean, it leads us to
yeah, it makes
unfortunate
sense.
inflammatory ways, maybe feather plucking even in some cases
Mhm.
hurts, right?
It
Yeah.
makes sense to me. So I don't have any literature yet. It's a sign of studies to be done, but it would make sense to me that products that have, let's say, two products with the same amount of calories, but those calories have a different composition. I could see those two things reacting differently. I could see that. Hopefully one day we will have some testing to see if that hypothesis is true. We don't know, but someone's gonna need to do some more studies.
Yeah, and I think it's like there's an estimate of like half of the African gray population these days has feather destructive behavior, and it's got to be something related to diet or light or temperature, one of those variables, because I don't think it's medical. We always have, unless they're
Yeah.
pulling their skin and bleeding, that's a whole nother issue. But it's just way too many of them. Maybe they're all allergic to the northern hemisphere, who knows? But this is where your research could have some profound findings, because it might be
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited at the concept. One of the reasons I wanted to do this like Budgie Academy style thing, because I think a lot of times people underestimate what it takes to be really well versed in one super specific thing. And people can try to be everything. Like they're like, I am the end all be all, like expert in everything. And I just don't think that that's possible. Once you get deep enough into original research to see what it takes to bring original research to the table, it becomes so obvious that there's no way
Any one person can do it all, right?
There is no way. If someone is claiming that, I think it's just either they don't know what it is that they're saying, or I don't know, just
be cautious. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the reasons I wanted to focus on budgies was because one, I started with budgies, and two, I like budgies. I chose them not because I actually worked with birds of prey before I came to parrots. So I chose budgies, not because like us, one of the things I see with budgies is people would start with budgies so they can trade up to something bigger. And I'm like, just get the experience for the bird that you want. I chose budgies because I like budgies.
Right.
But with African grays, like one of the things in these like feather destructive type situations that I really like what Pamela says, that it's her approach is you really have to re-engineer the system that the bird is living in. They're often having multiple things not being met. And so, the way that she's teaching me now to approach these types of cases and walking me through these cases, I really appreciate, because it's re-engineering all of the things.
Yeah, looking at the whole.
Trying to stick the blame, because I know it feels good to stick the blame on one thing, be like, it must be that thing, and it must be that thing. But really, it's the whole welfare of the bird that's multifaceted and coming together to form their overall welfare, right? Like,
and we can't always just say they're hormonal or blame it on something that's, one pronged, right?
Yes, but in reality, it's generally
a multitude
of things that need to be adjusted in order to be successful. But I think
that's why they do so well when they're rehomed sometimes, because they just needed that reset. They needed to have a different environment.
Yeah, or the new person engineered the environment properly, finally, maybe.
Right.
We'd have to look at,
those more patterns got disrupted.
Yeah, and look at, more than just one factor, right? It's this multifaceted overall thing. Like people ask me sometimes, like, is this cage for my budgie big enough? Really common question. And I'm like, it's not like 32 inches wide is good and 31 inches is not good enough, like that doesn't make sense. I said, you got to look at ideally wider is better. And also I want to see the overall pattern of the bird. Some people work from home. This bird's cage is almost never closed. They kind of spend most of their days frolicking about, right? Versus someone who's working 8 hours a day and they have to spend more time in that cage. Okay, now you really
Needs action in another way.
pay attention to the width of that enclosure, like years ago, Fitzy needed this big cage that used to be the budgie cage, this one. She needed a hospital cage. I only had this cage and another like smaller tabletop, but it was pandemic time. So this became Fitzy's hospital cage, and Dappy just kind of frolicked about the house. And he had a little tabletop cage that he would go into sleep, and that was it. Otherwise, he just frolicked about the tree stands in the house, and he was a perfectly distinguished gentleman. So it's one of those very interesting things where I urge people when they're looking at welfare to look at the whole bird, look at all of the things and re-engineer, because I really think that Pamela is right in that approach.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, Amy, you are a force for good, and we're putting a lot of hope in you for the future of changing some of the paradigms and definitely improving the knowledge that we all can benefit from. And, you're part of that continuation of learning and data sorting and, just things we really need for birds to thrive in our homes. It's a challenge, and we'll never get it exactly right. We can't, because it's not nature, but we can certainly do better. And you're part of that.
Incrementally. Yeah, it's what I tell my clients, like incrementally, one thing at a time. Some things are really accessible, like storing your pellets properly, easy. We can do it today,
Approximations, as we say in behavior.
Yes, little by little, we're going to get there, because it's our behavior too, little by little.
Mostly, a lot of times. Yeah,
and like forcing it all of a sudden and then it not being sustainable is also not going to work. We have to build it. I find I build it with people in a sustainable way. So, okay, these things that are really accessible, that are easy, let's knock out some easy wins, right? Get those in, and then slowly, bit by bit, we build until the system is functional.
Well, I also love that you're elevating the budgie as a viable, special, important world best talker, supposedly. World record. I mean, more people, if they could appreciate budgies, would be better off, than getting birds that are harder to take care of and live such a long time. So I mean, elevating their reputation.
And one of the really interesting things about budgies is because of all their color genetics, their contributions to what we know about Mendelian genetics and how all those genetic combinations work is a lot, We
didn't even get into that, all the non-naturally colored budgies and their lifespan is kind of like the chickens, they have shorter lifespans. They're so genetically messed up in some cases. I'm sure that's the case for some of the budgies too, that they're all the hybrids,
Yeah, we've seen some. It's hard to tell because there's no like controlled studies on it. There's only kind of like loose observation, so we can't tell. But I know that wild budgies are smaller, even smaller probably than the ones in my house. They're quite small. But yeah, some of the budgies that are overly large and very, very fluffy. I mean, at minimum, sometimes the feathers are actually blocking their face. So they actually, sometimes people will observe this behavior where they bump into things when they fly. So, or they seem to kind of bump into things. It's hard to tell. I mean, without some more data or some more, at least a decent collection of anecdotes, but maybe it's time for study. Yeah, we'd have to survey a pretty large number of budgies to see if there's a difference in lifespan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because some studies say that they can live up to 25 years. I mean, things are changing in that regard because we're taking better care of the birds. So they are in some cases living longer. And when I was with Don Brightsmith one time in Peru, it was one of those epiphany moments for him when he said, "Oh, they're dying a lot younger in the wild than I thought," mostly because the mates were fighting to the death over, very few number of nests or mates. And so that's how they mostly die in the wild, even though they can be preyed upon as well. And we talked about comparing captive versus wild bird lifespans to see if there was anything interesting there. One of those things we've never gotten around to, but yeah, I think they are living longer in some cases now in captivity than they are in the wild because care's improved. But budgies I've heard they can live up to 25 years. Have you heard that?
I've heard that they can definitely live longer than the 5 to 7 average for sure.
Right.
A lot of times, one of the things that frustrates me is I'll adopt a 5-year-old female, and I adopted 2 5-year-old females in a row. So I'd bring them to the vet, and then they go, "Oh, a senior budgie," and I'm like, it's not really senior. Like, a 5 to 8 year lifespan. Is the bird really senior, or are so many on all seed diets and poor diets that they're just dying that young?
Right. That's why they're considered geriatric sooner than they need to be.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
it kind of makes me wonder if a 5-year-old budgie is really senior, because I'm pretty sure you could put a 2-year-old budgie in my house and you wouldn't be able to tell between Tritsy, Eva, and a 2-year-old female. I don't know if you could tell the difference through their behavior at all. In Fitzy, you can kind of start to see a little bit, but it's because she also has another medical condition, but she's almost 10 years old. So budgies can certainly live longer.
Yeah.
We will
And how
see.
you take care of them definitely makes the difference.
Yeah, as things improve, as we improve our care, hopefully we start to see the average budgie living longer and longer. It would be great.
The other reason I think budgies and cockatiels are such better birds for most people in their homes is because they're easier to let them fly. And so many birds are dying of heart disease. And, who can let macaws fly in their house? Not many. So
Yes. Actually, when I first had a fun fact about me, I'm very allergic to fur. I'm very allergic to livestock, despite my many years of working with them for the sake of my degree. I took a lot of Zyrtec, but one of the things about budgies is when I was a graduate student, I got them when I was a first-year graduate student, my first 2 budgies. And one of the reasons I chose budgies was because I didn't want to be in a position where I was struggling to meet the welfare bar. Like, I didn't want to feel like I was struggling to get them what they needed and just meeting the bare minimum. I want to feel like they're able to happily exist, So I really liked budgies because it's quite funny because now that I've multiple apartments later, back when I was in a 1-bedroom apartment, now I have a house, and it's quite funny to see them just like zoom down the hallway, and they, it's nothing like what they do in the wild, but you get some
so much closer. Yes.
yeah,
Absolutely.
some flaps, some flapping is happening at least. But yeah, I can tell between like this cage, the double wide for the budgies, like they can actually fly from one end to the other. Like, even though this one for the cockatiels, like there's no way, even in a double wide, if it was like 2 of these side by side, there's no way. Like the way the bird's wingspan scaled so quickly. When I was in my previous apartment, and it was just a bit smaller than this one, when Gandalf would fly down the hallway, I would practice recall with him down the hallway. And when he would turn the corner, like the 90-degree corner, I immediately could see, I was like, I really can't have much bigger of a bird in here fly that comfortably, because when he opened his wings wide, it was only a portion of the hallway, but I was like, oh, it's, like there's not that much wiggle room. Like it's like 3 cockatiels wide, maybe, like. So I was like, oh,
if
wow.
they can't fly, we always recommend people get as wide a cage as possible with just I call it a super highway of perches, just so they're moving, they're doing something. They're not sitting on 1 or 2 perches. They're actually moving from point A to point B. It's good for their feet. It's good for their heart. It's good, just mentally better. you know?
Yeah, and cage shape is a common one, like a lot of older cages, because it fits better in a home, you know, it's
Yeah,
less square footage. I get it. So a lot of older cages are designed this kind of skinny tall.
yep,
It's a big problem.
yep,
I tell you, I'm like, even if a lot of times people are like, oh, I can't afford, like, I'm like, you don't have to buy, you know, this double wide necessarily. Even some of like the tabletop, quote, quote, finch flight cages, quote, quote. But
right.
the tabletop ones, it's almost the same width as one of these. It's just half the
The
height.
height, right,
I'm like, even that is better than the,
right.
you
And then
know,
it's valuable real estate all around the cage. You can do all kinds of things on the cage, from the ceiling, et cetera. There's just so many other places to go and things to do, right? That
yeah,
doesn't have to be
compared
within
to,
confined space.
yeah, the skinny tall is a very challenging shape for them. It's
Terrible.
really, yeah, there are a few cages out there that are fairly affordable, but they're the same width as this. They're this
Mhm.
wide, but like almost half the height, or like 2/3 of the height. Like for a
Yeah.
starter cage where, you know, we don't have a couple $100 to spare, you know, for something less than $100, like it's a decent starting option, you know, because at least it's the right width and it has the door is a good size.
Right, that's
The
important.
budgie cages, the tiny doors are one of the most challenging, because every time you try to
Crazy.
take something out, you bump it and the whole cage shakes, and it's just, it's doable, but it's just like more challenging compared to one with a bigger door. So
You could still get on Amazon a cage that's like 60 inches wide. It's like a double flight cage for
yeah.
under 200. I think it's 169. That probably won't last longer, but I love those for the smaller birds because they're
Yeah.
so wide. Mhm.
Yeah, and
Buy them now, guys, because I'm sure they're going to go up like everything else, especially that are being imported, which is what most cages are now. And the powder coating is just terrible.
Mm,
It's not what it used to be. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Another reason I like to have a lot of purchase, so they're not putting a lot of wear and tear on the powder coating,
yeah,
wearing it down because it's just thinner than it used to be. So the cage gets old faster. Yeah,
yeah. As with anything else, over time, things decline in quality, and
right.
yeah.
Exactly. Well, we have taken up so much of your time. I'm sure we could talk. There's like 16 more questions and probably some we didn't fully answer. So here's the important one though. If somebody wants to do a consult with you, how would they go about doing that?
Oh, that is a good question. So for budgies, you can just book them directly through my website. So if you go on any of my social medias, I go by the Budgie Academy on TikTok or on Instagram, and you'll find,
budgieacademy.com, right?
yeah, or on the website itself, and under services, you can find the booking page for consults. Um, for non-budgie cases, I usually have people DM me first. Let's see if it's something I can help you with, if it's within something I feel comfortable. If not, I would refer you to Pamela. And if someone last time asked me for help with their cockatoo, and I'm like, you should probably talk to Pamela because I've never lived with an umbrella cockatoo. So she's going to be a better resource than that. But for budgie cases, I will take the budgie cases. Other kind of opportunistic breeders, you know, like cockatiels. Yeah. Or for non-budgie cases, I have people just DM me. And so I can kind of see if it's something that I know how to solve and I feel comfortable solving. If not, yeah, I would reach out to Pamela, or I'll tell you, hey, like this is a little bit out of my realm of expertise. You should talk to Pamela and have her help you. So yeah, especially for some of the larger birds, like if it's, yeah, the cockatoo one is the one that sticks out to me because they
Yeah.
typically wanted,
It's
yeah,
a
help.
challenge for anybody, right?
Yeah, engineering the enrichment for the cockatoo. And I was like, okay, you need to have lived with a cockatoo in order to do this. So please talk to Pamela, she'll help you. Because yeah, I haven't yet had the privilege of experiencing the cockatoo in my house, you know, so
Right. And I see
one day.
cases online. She does a great job also. Awesome Animal Solutions if anybody's looking for behavior help for the larger birds. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to meet you, know you, and count on you, frankly, for the future of many things for birds. You're on the track to some really important information. So you have our support, and I'm sure many others as well are grateful for all you're doing. So please stay in touch and come back. That would be great. Thanks
course.
everybody for being here. And oh, so don't forget, next month is Carmen. I'm not sure how she says her last name, Budai. She's in England. She's got some incredible cookbooks. I love her cookbooks. And she's all about natural foods, sprouting, flowers, herbs, etc. And I don't think she's ever given a talk before. This will be her first, but her cookbooks to me represent the fact that she's well studied, well versed on natural food. So hope you'll come back next month as well. Hey, and everybody, don't forget our next retreat in Asheville is coming up in April. We do them every 2 years. A lot of fun for a weekend. Hope you could join us, book a hotel, come on down. So, or up or wherever you're from. Hope you'll come. Anyway, thanks again, everybody, especially to you, Dr. Zhao. We're so grateful. You're the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne, for having me. And also thank you, Pamela, for referring me for this opportunity. I'm eternally grateful. It was super fun. And yeah, we'll talk more.
We'll keep in touch. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Everybody go to the budgieacademy.com and follow her on her page and all those other social media things that I don't do speak well about, but you do, and that's where you're at. And so everybody support her and her work because she's on the right track for some really good stuff. So thanks again. Look forward to seeing everybody next month. Bye, Dr. Zhao. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.